Blood trailed behind James Morgan like a crimson signature across the Montana plains. The ex-Union major clutched his wounded shoulder, fighting to stay upright in the saddle as his exhausted stallion pushed forward through the blistering summer heat of 1887. 3 dead men lay in his wake, all hired guns belonging to Clayton Ford, the most dangerous man in the territory. The bullet in James's shoulder was a parting gift from their attempt to steal Henderson's cattle. "Just a bit further, boy," he murmured to his horse, scanning the horizon for any sign of shelter. The animal responded with a labored snort, its once powerful stride now faltering with each step. When the beast finally collapsed beneath him, James barely managed to roll clear of the falling mass of muscle and bone. Standing alone in the vast emptiness, James spotted a distant structure, a ranch house sitting proudly on a ridge. With one hand pressed against his bleeding wound and the other clutching his Colt revolver, he staggered forward. The world tilted and spun around him as he pushed through the property's weathered gate. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was a pair of weathered boots approaching through the dust. Cold steel pressed against his temple pulled James back to consciousness. His eyes snapped open to find himself staring down the barrel of a Winchester rifle, held with unwavering precision by a woman with silver-streaked dark hair and eyes hardened by years of frontier life. "You've got 10 seconds to explain why you're bleeding all over my property before I put a hole through your head," she said, her voice as steady as her aim. "Ma'am," James croaked, his throat desert dry, "I mean no harm. Just rode too far with a bullet in me." The rifle didn't waver. "You're running from something, or someone. Clayton Ford's men. Killed 3 of them in self-defense at Silverwood Creek." The name landed like a thunderclap. The woman's eyes narrowed, but the rifle lowered an inch. "Ford sent men after you?" "Yes, ma'am." "Why?" "Caught them rustling cattle from the Henderson place. They drew first." She studied him with cold calculation, taking in his blood-soaked shirt, the cavalry-style mustache, and the worn grip of his Colt. Finally, she lowered the rifle. "I'm Victoria Blackwood. This is my ranch." She offered no smile, no warmth. "If you're an enemy of Clayton Ford, you might live another day. If you're lying, you'll wish I'd shot you now." 2 hours later, James sat at Victoria's kitchen table, bandaged but alert, sipping black coffee strong enough to raise the dead. The cabin's interior surprised him. Modest furnishings, contrasting with hints of hidden wealth. Silver candlesticks, fine china tucked away in a corner cabinet, a gold pocket watch hanging from a hook. "Ford's been trying to buy this land for years," Victoria said, breaking the silence. "First with money, then with threats." "Why this property?" Victoria's gaze hardened. 15 years ago, my husband Michael discovered gold beneath this land. A week later, he was found dead in an old mine shaft with a bullet in his back. Ford called it an accident, but we both know better. James's eyes widened slightly. Ford wants the gold. He's always suspected it was here, but never knew for certain. Victoria sipped her coffee. "Until now, it seems. His efforts to force me out have doubled in recent months. Those men will come looking. Ford doesn't forget, and he doesn't forgive." "Neither do I, Major Morgan." Victoria set her cup down with a decisive clink. "Your reputation precedes you. Famous for tracking Comancheros across 3 territories after the war." James stiffened. "How do you—" "I make it my business to know who's who in these parts." She stood abruptly. "You need rest. We'll talk strategy in the morning." Later that night, unable to sleep, James explored the silent house. His military instincts demanded he know every exit, every defensive position. In the study, a floorboard creaked differently from the others. Curiosity piqued, he pressed against the wood, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside lay a stockpile that made his breath catch. Gold nuggets the size of quail eggs, stacks of property deeds to half the businesses in Timber Ridge, and an arsenal that would make a cavalry regiment envious. Victoria Blackwood was no ordinary rancher. "Find what you were looking for?" Victoria's voice cut through the darkness. She stood in the doorway, another rifle aimed at his chest. "You're sitting on a gold mine," James said quietly, "and you've been preparing for war. My husband discovered it 15 years ago. A week later, he was murdered. Nobody knows about it except me. And now you." Her finger tightened on the trigger. "Give me one reason why I shouldn't bury another secret tonight." James looked her dead in the eye. "Because you need someone who knows how to fight Clayton Ford. And that's me." Dawn broke with both of them still alive. An uneasy alliance formed. The next week transformed the Blackwood Ranch into a fortress. James installed sharpened stakes at strategic approach points, while Victoria reinforced the barn's walls with steel plating salvaged from an abandoned mining operation. They moved with the precision of veteran soldiers preparing for siege. "These firing positions give us overlapping fields of fire," James explained, pointing to the newly constructed platforms. "Anyone coming up that main trail will be caught in a crossfire." Victoria nodded approvingly. "You know your business, Major." "So do you," James replied, noting her expert handling of tools and weapons alike. "Not many widows could run a ranch this size alone." "Not many widows had to watch their husband die in their arms," she countered, hammering another nail with unnecessary force. "Changes a woman's priorities." As they worked, James taught Victoria military tactics, how to create defensive fallback positions, conserve ammunition, predict enemy movements. In return, she shared intimate knowledge of the land, hidden springs, narrow passes, unstable ground where a horse might stumble. Their days fell into rhythm, work from dawn until dusk, then strategy discussions by lamplight. Neither spoke much about their pasts, but fragments emerged like gold flakes in a pan. James's leadership during the Battle of Shiloh, Victoria's journey west as a young bride, his nightmares of fallen comrades, her 15 years of solitary vigilance. On the 8th day, they rode into Timber Ridge for supplies. The town's single street buzzed with activity, commerce and gossip flowing in equal measure. Heads turned as they passed, whispers following in their wake. "Blackwood widow's got herself a man." "That's Morgan. Heard he killed 3 of Ford's boys." "She's finally selling that worthless land?" At the general store, the owner greeted Victoria with forced politeness. "Mrs. Blackwood, surprising to see you in town twice in 1 month." "Need ammunition," she replied curtly. "Rifles and revolvers." The shopkeeper's eyebrows rose. "Planning a war, are you?" James stepped forward. "Just being prepared for unwanted visitors." The saloon across the street emptied as Marcus Reed, Ford's right-hand man, strutted into the sunlight. He was tall and rail-thin, with a pock-marked face and a gunfighter's stance. "Well, if it isn't the famous Major Morgan," Reed called out, hand hovering near his holster. "Boss wants a word with you about our boys you put in the ground." The street cleared instantly, shopkeepers and customers retreating behind doors and windows. James turned slowly. "Your boys drew on me while stealing Henderson's cattle. They chose their fate." Reed spat tobacco juice in the dust. "And you've chosen yours riding with the Blackwood Witch." Victoria's hand moved toward her own weapon, but James gave an imperceptible shake of his head. Reed continued, "Mr. Ford's a reasonable man. He'll forget about those 3 graves if you ride out by sundown. Hell, he might even hire you. Pays better than playing nursemaid to an old woman." The insult hung in the air like gun smoke. James stepped into the street, positioning himself squarely before Reed. "I've known men like Ford my whole life. Bullies who mistake cruelty for strength." His voice carried to every hiding townsperson. "Tell your boss if he wants this land, he'll have to come take it himself." Reed's hand dropped to his gun, But James was faster, impossibly, supernaturally faster. Before Reed could clear leather, James's Colt appeared as if by dark magic, the barrel pressing against the man's forehead. I don't want to add a fourth grave, Reed. Ride back to Ford. Tell him what you saw here today. As Reed backed away, the townspeople emerged from hiding, looking at James with new respect, and at Victoria with new curiosity. That night back at the ranch, Victoria elaborated on her husband's death. Michael had mapped every tunnel beneath their property, documenting the extent of the gold vein. Before he could file an official claim, he'd been murdered. The local sheriff called it an accident, Victoria said bitterly, said the tunnel collapsed, but there was a bullet hole in his back when I found him. James stared into the fire. You're certain Ford was responsible? I know it. Michael told me Ford had approached him about a partnership just days before. When Michael refused to share the claim, Ford threatened him. Victoria's voice tightened. I've spent 15 years building my strength, buying businesses in town through proxies. I own half of Timber Ridge now, though nobody knows it. I've been preparing for the day Ford makes his final move. James nodded slowly. That day is coming soon. Reed will have told him about our confrontation. Let them come, Victoria said, checking the action on her rifle. I've waited 15 years for justice. The attack came 3 nights later, 5 riders approaching from the north, using the new moon's darkness as cover. James spotted them crossing the lower pasture and signaled Victoria with 2 short whistles. They took positions as practiced. Victoria in the reinforced barn with the Winchester, James behind the stone wall near the house. The first rider fell when he triggered a tripwire, his horse screaming as it stumbled into a hidden pit. The others scattered, returning fire blindly toward the house. The night erupted in gunfire. James picked off one attacker as he tried to flank the position. Victoria's rifle cracked methodically, keeping 2 others pinned behind a rocky outcrop. The 5th man made a dash for the barn but collapsed halfway there, clutching his leg after James's bullet found its mark. When silence finally fell, James approached the wounded man cautiously. Sam? He gasped, recognizing the face in the lantern light. Sam Hollister? The wounded man squinted up. Morgan? Jesus Christ. You know him? Victoria asked, rifle still trained on the prone figure. We served together, 47th Illinois. James knelt beside his former comrade. What the hell are you doing riding with Ford? Sam grimaced through pain. Man's gotta eat. Didn't know you were mixed up in this. How many more men is Ford sending? James demanded. All of them. 20 hired guns at least. Sam clutched James's sleeve. He knows about the gold, Morgan. Someone's been watching the property, saw you 2 checking the old mine entrance. He's coming with everything he's got. Victoria's face paled in the moonlight. We need to leave. Tonight. But James stood slowly, resolution hardening his features. No, I've spent my life running. From the war, from memories, from myself. I'm done running. He turned to Victoria, his expression unyielding. This is your home. You fought for it for 15 years. We make our stand here. Word spread quickly through the neighboring ranches. The Blackwood widow and the famous Major Morgan were standing against Clayton Ford. By week's end, 5 men had joined their cause. Henderson, whose cattle Ford had stolen, the Wilson brothers, whose water rights Ford had threatened, old Santiago, whose son had disappeared after confronting Ford's men, and young Travis Cole, eager to prove himself. James drilled them relentlessly, transforming farmers and ranchers into a disciplined fighting unit. Victoria opened her hidden armory, equipping each man with quality weapons. They fortified the ranch, digging trenches, establishing fallback positions, and preparing for a siege. Each night, the defenders gathered around Victoria's table, sharing meals and memories. For the first time in 15 years, laughter echoed through the house. Victoria found herself studying James when he wasn't looking. The way leadership sat naturally on his shoulders, how his eyes remained vigilant even in moments of apparent relaxation. "Why did you really stay?" she asked him privately on the 10th night as they checked ammunition supplies. "You could have ridden away from this fight." James considered the question. "After the war, I lost my purpose. Just drifted, taking whatever jobs came along." He methodically counted rifle cartridges. "But this, protecting something that matters, standing against men like Ford, this is worth fighting for." His eyes met hers. "Worth dying for, if necessary." Victoria felt something long dormant stir within her chest. Before she could respond, a rider approached at breakneck speed. Travis Cole, who'd been stationed as lookout in town. "They're coming," he shouted. "But we've got a problem. Davis is gone. Rode out last night. I think he's gone to Ford." James cursed. Davis had been their seventh man, a quiet rancher from the South Valley. "He knows all our positions, our plans. We need to change everything," Victoria said. "Now." They worked through the night, altering defensive positions, moving supplies, creating false targets. At dawn, James gathered the men. "Ford will come with superior numbers, but we have preparation and position. Hold your fire until they're within certain range. Make every shot count." By mid-morning, dust clouds rose from the southern approach. Ford had arrived with an army, 30 riders at least, each armed for war. They formed a line just beyond rifle range, and a single rider approached under a white flag. Clayton Ford himself sat atop a magnificent black stallion. He was older than James expected, perhaps 60, with a patrician face weathered by decades of frontier life. He wore an Eastern-cut suit incongruous with the surroundings, and a silver-topped cane rested across his saddle. "Mrs. Blackwood," he called out, his voice carrying easily across the distance, "this needn't end in bloodshed. I'm prepared to offer $20,000 for your property, a generous sum for land with nothing but scrub grass and bad memories." Victoria stepped forward, rifle cradled in her arms. "This land isn't for sale, Ford. Not at any price." Ford's pleasant expression didn't waver. "I understand your attachment. After all, this is where dear Michael met his unfortunate end." He smiled thinly. "Such a tragic accident." "It wasn't an accident," Victoria replied coldly. "And we both know it." "Do we?" Ford's smile widened. "Perhaps you should ask yourself why a mining engineer would enter an unstable tunnel alone, unless he had arranged to meet someone he trusted." Victoria stiffened. James moved closer to her side. 15 years is a long time to wait for justice, Mrs. Blackwood," Ford continued. "Almost as long as I've waited to claim what's mine. You see, Michael found that gold on my claim. He stole my future, so I took his." Ford's mask of civility slipped. "And now I'll take yours." He turned his horse. "You have 1 hour to surrender the property. After that, I will take it by force, and no one will leave alive." As Ford rejoined his men, Victoria's hands trembled with rage. He admitted it. After all these years, he finally admitted killing Michael. James placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "He's trying to unsettle you before the fight. Don't let him." She nodded, composing herself. "I won't, but I need to show you something. Now." Victoria led James to the old mine entrance, hidden behind a stand of pine trees. Michael mapped every tunnel, every chamber. There's a weakness in the main shaft, a supporting wall barely holding. With enough dynamite, James grasped her plan immediately. "We could collapse the entire hillside beneath them." "Exactly," Victoria said grimly. "But someone would need to set the charges while we draw their attention at the ranch." Their eyes met in silent understanding. The battle began precisely 1 hour later. Ford's men charged across the open ground toward the ranch buildings, confident in their superior numbers. They met a withering fire from the defenders' hidden positions. 6 attackers fell in the first volley, but the others pressed forward, using the rolling terrain for cover. James directed the defense masterfully, rotating men between positions to create the illusion of greater numbers. Henderson took a bullet to the arm but continued firing. Santiago's ancient Sharps rifle claimed 3 attackers with 3 shots. The Wilson brothers protected each other's flanks like they'd been soldiers all their lives. But Ford's men kept coming. They breached the outer perimeter, setting fire to the barn. Smoke billowed across the battlefield, obscuring vision on both sides. In the confusion, Victoria slipped away toward the mine entrance, a satchel of dynamite slung over her shoulder. James saw her go but maintained his focus on the battle. When Ford's men reached the house, he ordered the defenders to fall back to their final positions. The fighting became desperate, room to room, hand to hand in places. James took a bullet through his thigh but kept fighting, his Colt claiming 2 more lives. At the mine, Victoria worked frantically, placing dynamite charges at the stress points Michael had marked in his journal. Sweat streaked through the dust on her face as she connected the fuses. Suddenly, footsteps echoed in the tunnel behind her. "Mrs. Blackwood," Ford's cultured voice called out. "I suspected you might try something clever." He emerged from the shadows, leaning on his cane, flanked by 2 gunmen. "Did Michael share his little secret with you before he died? About how the gold vein extends all the way to my property line?" Victoria straightened, facing her husband's killer. "He told me everything. How you offered him partnership, then demanded he sign over all rights. How he refused." Ford sighed. "Such a waste. He could have been a wealthy man." He gestured to his men. "Killer." A shot rang out, but it was Ford's man who fell. James stood at the tunnel entrance, blood soaking his pant leg, revolver smoking. "Run! Victoria!" he shouted, firing again as Ford's second man raised his weapon. Victoria sprinted deeper into the tunnel, toward the main chamber where the largest charge waited. Behind her, gunfire echoed off stone walls. She reached the chamber, hands shaking as she lit the master fuse. The sparks sizzled to life, racing toward destruction. James staggered into the chamber moments later, leaving a trail of blood. "Ford?" Victoria asked. "Wounded. Coming." James collapsed against the wall. "How long on that fuse?" 3 minutes, maybe less." He nodded grimly. "Go. There's a side passage that leads out near the creek. Michael showed me on his maps." "I'm not leaving you," Victoria insisted. "Yes, you are." James pressed his revolver into her hand. "Someone has to rebuild after this. Someone has to tell the story." The tunnel mouth darkened as Ford appeared, clutching his bloodied arm, hatred twisting his aristocratic features. "Go!" James shouted, pushing Victoria toward the escape tunnel. He turned to face Ford one last time. "It's over, Clayton. The gold, the land, it dies here with us." Ford raised his pistol. "Then so be it." Victoria ran through the narrow passage, tears streaming down her face. Behind her, 2 shots thundered, then silence. She emerged into daylight just as the first rumble began. A deep, seismic groaning as the earth shifted. The hillside seemed to shudder, then collapse inward, taking the mine, the gold, and the men with it. When the dust settled, half of Ford's men were buried. The others, leaderless and disheartened, surrendered or fled. Victoria stood watching as the survivors of her small army gathered around her. "Ford?" Henderson asked. "Dead," Victoria answered. "Along with the gold. And James." The men removed their hats in respect. Victoria squared her shoulders, looking over the battlefield that had once been her home. Buildings smoldered. Fences lay splintered, but the land remained. Her land, purchased with blood and sacrifice. "We rebuild," she said simply. "All of us. Together." 1 year later, the Blackwood Ranch stood transformed. New buildings had risen from the ashes, stronger than before. The neighboring ranchers had formed an alliance, with Victoria as their leader. Timber Ridge had elected a new sheriff, young Travis Cole, who enforced the law without fear or favor. Victoria stood on her porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. She wore a simple black dress, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun. At 59, her face showed the lines of hardship, but also of triumph. From the rebuilt barn emerged a figure that still caused whispers in town, James Morgan, walking with a pronounced limp, but very much alive. The escape tunnel had collapsed behind Victoria, but James had found another way out. Crawling through a fissure opened by the explosion, more dead than alive. When she'd found him 3 days after the battle, half buried in rubble at the creek's edge, Victoria had believed she was seeing a ghost. His pulse had been faint, his body broken, but life had stubbornly clung to him. For weeks, she'd nursed him in secret, watching the miracle of his recovery with a mixture of disbelief and fierce joy. "I thought I'd lost you," she'd whispered when he'd finally regained consciousness. James had simply taken her hand and replied, "I promised I'd fight for this land." That promise didn't end with Ford. Now he worked as her ranch foreman, their partnership built on shared battle and mutual respect. Together, they'd rebuilt not just the ranch, but a community free from Ford's shadow. "Supply wagons back from town," James reported, climbing the porch steps carefully. "Travis sends word that two strangers were asking questions about Clayton Ford's disappearance." Victoria nodded. It was bound to happen eventually. Trouble? Perhaps. She turned to face him. "Are you ready for another fight, Major Morgan?" A slow smile spread across James's weathered face. "With you? Always." The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land they had defended together. A partnership forged in fire, tempered by sacrifice and built to last.